I propose we get started. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We're delighted to be joined by Rabbi Schiff, the founder and chief executive of Jewish Futures, and well known to our community as a mechutin of Rabbi Kimchi. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. As I've mentioned, I've sent around a link to the source sheet in the chat, and I'll do that periodically when people join. If you do have a computer handy to print it, that would be great. But yeah, I'm delighted to be joined by Rabbi Schiff, and I will hand over to the Rav now.
Good evening. This is actually the first shir that I'm giving in England, as it were, even though it's virtually, because I am sitting in Yerushalayim. I can see that some members of my family here as well. So it's nice to see you, although the truth is, whenever I do this, I actually ask people to open their cameras, because then we can actually see them and actually talking to real people. Some of you, maybe all of you, know that we sat Shiva last week for my mother, Chava Miriam Bas Shmuel Yehuda Alei Shalom Harini Kaporas Bishkova. This is the first year that I'm giving since then in London. There have been others, but I guess that's special because I grew up in London and we lived in London, and my parents came to Aliyah 25 years ago. One of the most beautiful things that I found on Shabbos during the Shiva was something that my mother had drawn. And alongside it were handwritten notes that I have in front of me that I'm showing you now. Probably from the days of Rabbi Bernstein, Olav Shalom, my parents hadn't so religiously attended a shir as they did at Nei Yisrael with Rabbi Bernstein. This in particular are notes of a shir that my mother gave. And my mother didn't give shirim very often, and certainly not in Ivrit. This at the top of this page of notes, it says, talk given at Emunah Ivrit class, the 20th of July, 2005, which was soon, it was quite a few years after my parents came in Aliyah. The subject of the shir was Yerushalayim, Ha'ayin Shel Ha'olam, the eye of the world. And it's difficult for me to handle this piece of paper without actually crying, especially because we're just 2 or 3 days off from Tisha B'Av, and I'm sitting here in the old city. The last words that she wrote on this piece of paper were Hitragshut sheyeshli, the emotions that I have, umodeh ani kol yom, and I thank Hashem every day. Amazel uzchus lichyot po. What a mazel and what a privilege to live in Yerushalayim. So, Mummy, you just did this to me again, but I guess those are good feelings and good thoughts. To talk about the title of the few words that we'll spend together, crying for nothing. I often say to the Rabbonim in Jewish Futures, in Aish, and all the organizations, as we draw close to Tisha B'Av, unfortunately, throughout the world, part of the avoda of Tisha B'Av has become, what are we crying about? The avoda of Tisha B'Av is, what is the avoda of Tisha B'Av? As I often say to my friends, in the business that we're in the work that we're in, which is trying to pass on the torch to the next generation, trying to think about the state of the union every day of the Jewish people, it's not difficult to plug into Tisha B'Av. It's not difficult to plug into the ignorance, to the judgmentalism, to the partisanship of Klal Yisrael when you're trying to reach Hashem's children, and they're running away or they're not connected. And I must say that I've sort of run the picket line on Rehov Balfour for the last 11 weeks. I think I've been in Yerushalayim for 11 weeks. by my mother's bedside. It was a tremendous chus, and it was a tremendous hashgacha that we could continue our work on Zoom and online at the same time. And every Shabbos afternoon, I would walk via the Prime Minister's house, and every Shabbos afternoon, the crowds got bigger of people demonstrating and counter-demonstrating. And as you know, this last Friday, Erev Shabbat, and Motzei Shabbat, there were awful scenes in Yerushalayim of Jews fighting Jews, some thinking that the Prime Minister is the Mashiach, and some people thinking he is the devil incarnate. And there isn't much of a tarbut dibur, a culture of dialogue, unfortunately, yet in Israel. We shout and we scream and we punch and we kick and we shove, and one doesn't need to go too far to lahamchish, to concretize what Tisha B'Av is about. So what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes with you talking about what are the origins of Tisha B'Av. Because if we look at the origins of Tisha B'Av, we'll understand why Tisha B'Av repeats itself again and again and again. The first Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, the expulsions of Jews from Spain, many pogroms, the beginning of the First World War, the list is endless. But it makes sense, like when we're looking for the meaning of a word in Torah, in Tanakh, it makes sense. Go look at the Bible and see how it explains what the word is the first time it comes up, and then we'll understand really what the essence of the word is. So similarly, if we look at the first Tisha B'Av in history, we can understand from there, and not as an academic understanding, but something to put right. So maybe this Tisha B'Av on Thursday will be a real moed, a moed of joy, a moed where we come up to Yerushalayim and we meet in Yerushalayim in joy, and not Eicha Yoshua Badad. Eicha Yoshua Badad. Yerushalayim sitting in quarantine. There are no tourists. For the first time since the establishment of the state of Israel, we can't get in. We can't get in. And the Gemara says, Kol Dor Shalom Nivna Bo Beis HaMikdash B'Yamav. Any generation in which the Beis HaMikdash has not been rebuilt in their days, Kilu Nechrav B'Yamav. It's as if in 2020, Tafshin Pei, the Beis HaMikdash have been destroyed in front of our eyes. Why? Because we must in some way be perpetuating whatever the chet was, whatever it was at the very beginning. It repeats itself again and again, and we haven't put it right. So let's see if we can have a little look at that. I hope that most of you do have the source sheet. If you don't, it doesn't matter. I will read it out. The first quote on the sheet that we have is from Shlach Lecha. Shlach Lecha. The Meraglim came back, the spies came back from Eretz Yisrael. Vatisa Kaleida, and all the congregation lifted up their voice. Vayivnes Kolam. They raised their voice. Vayivku Am Balayla. And all the people cried on that night. And the Gemara in Tiny says, why did it say Balayla that night? The Gemara says, Osa Laila Lel Tisha B'Av. That night was Tisha B'Av. Omalem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said to them, Atem bechisem bechia shel chinam. You cried for nothing, chinam. Atem bechisem bechia shel chinam. Vani koveh lachem bechia l'doros. Because you cried for nothing, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Now, maybe some of the people on this Zoom call went to the same school as me. And even if you didn't, I guess we grew up in a generation where they gave us lines, where they gave us essays to write, and b'mechilas kavodam, writing out 100 times or 150 times or 200 times. I would not talk in class. It didn't really do it for me. I don't think anybody didn't talk in class because they got punishments like that. Lahavdil Avinu Shebashamayim, Avinu Avrachaman, Hamrachem. Our Father in heaven is not a vengeful God. That's not what Ekel Kano means. He's not a vengeful God. So when we cried for nothing, and he says to us, my dear children, Zisa Kindelach, Hivtachti Lachem, I promised the office, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Lezarachai, Nena, I will give them Eretz Yisrael. So can't you trust me? Why are you crying? You need to check out my credit rating. You need to make sure that, my word is good. Shvur nishbati v'lo kiyamti. I made a promise and I haven't yet kept it. Of course you're going to get Eretz Yisrael. So your bechir was chinam. It was for nothing. And if I've given you kli chemda shenivra ba'olam, if Jewish people, you are mamleches kanim v'goy kodesh, you are a holy people, a nation of priests, and I've given you my Torah, Torah's Chaim, Eitz Chaim He. You've got to be a people who understand reality and live for reality. And when you cry, you got to cry for real things. And when you laugh, laugh for real things. We live in a world where often we laugh for nourishkeit. And when we cry, we're not really crying for the right things. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on this day you cried for nothing. And I need you to be real parents. I need you to be real teachers. I need you to be real bearers of the torch, of the Or Lagoyim, of the Or Chodesh Al Tzion Toeh, of that light, of that beacon of light, of that torch that we're waiting for. And therefore I'm going to give you something to cry for so that you get in touch with reality. But what were they crying for? What was the Chet HaMeraglim? What was the source of that first Tisha B'Av? So if you go to the next source, which is also from the beginning of Shlach Lecha, Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Kaf Hey. The Pasuk says, Vayashuv mitur haaretz. The Meraglim, the 12 spies came back from doing a tour, from spying out Eretz Yisrael. Miketz Abraham after 40 days. They came back. Then the next Pasuk says, Vayelchu, and they went, Vayavo el Moshe ve'Aaron, and they came to Moses and Aaron. Ve'al adas b'nei Yisrael. What's the obvious question? The first pasuk says, "Vayashu mitur haaretz." They returned. And then the next pasuk says again, "Vayelchu vayavo." They went and they came back. That's peculiar. They've already come back. Why is it saying Vayelchu vayavo? So Rashi over there says, famous Rashi, Vayelchu vayavo, brings the Gemara in Sota Lamed. Mahu, what is Vayelchu? Why is the Torah sentence together? They went, and then they came back again. Lakish, to compare, Halichoson lebiason, to compare Halichatan, they're going, Vayelchu, lebiatan, to their coming back. Ma biatan beitzara, we know that they came back bringing a bad report, a negative report. Af halichatan beitzara, so their going was also with a bad counsel. And the Torah, this last week's portion in Devarim, was Me'id, testifies to us when Moshe Rabbeinu is going over the whole Torah before he dies in Devarim, in the first chapter of Devarim, Pasuk Kaf Beis, Vatikruvun elai kulchem. Moshe says, all of you, the whole rabble came to me, came to Moshe, and they said, let us send men in front of us. V'yachparu lanu et haaretz. Lachpor. What does lachpor mean in Ivrit? An ed chafira. When I was in the army, one of the things I had in my kit bag, which we never used, but whatever, it was a spade. Lachpor is to dig, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu says, all the Jewish people came to me and they said, let's send people into Eretz Yisrael. But now we know Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, V'yachparu lanu et haaretz. The Gemara in the next source says, V'yachparu lanu et haaretz, to dig up the earth. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Meraglim lo nitkavnu ela leboshata shel Eretz Yisrael. The Meraglim, the spies, did not intend to bring out anything from Eretz Yisrael except for the busha, the shame, the disgrace, the negativity of Eretz Yisrael. And that's why it says, V'yachparu lanu et haaretz. So what was the mistake of the Meraglim? What was the Chet HaMeraglim? Vayelchu vayavo, Makish halichatan lebiatan. It's comparing their going with their coming back. V'yachparu lanu et haaretz. In English, we're not short of this now. What do the press do? In English, we call it mud raking. Digging up the dirt. V'yachperu lanu et haaretz. Why was that atzad hameraglim? Why was it atzad hameraglim? This is the fascinating point that I want to bring out, because I think this, there's so much discussion of what was the Chet HaMeraglim, but when you look at it, it seems to be pretty pashut that this is what it was. The Meraglim had a preset agenda. The Meraglim had decided what they wanted to see. Whatever stage that was, it was before they went to look. And there's this, well, let's stick with the Meraglim. The Meraglim had decided what they wanted to see. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu sent Yoshua and Kalev to Daven, because he wanted to save them, because he knew that what they were going in, it wasn't to look for the good of Eretz Yisrael. And by the way, in parentheses, let's remind ourselves of what Hashem tells Moshe to do when he looks at Eretz Yisrael in this week's parasha, and again and again and again, he tells Moshe Rabbeinu how to look at Eretz Yisrael. What does he tell him to do? Alei Rosh HaPisgah, go up the mountain, v'sa inecha, and lift up your eyes, ure'ei et haaretz, and see the land. Now the truth is, there isn't any mountain in Eretz Yisrael from which you can see all of Eretz Yisrael. And even if there is, why is he telling him v'sa inecha? And the answer is, and believe me, I'm sitting in Eretz Yisrael now, and there are all sorts of workers coming and going. And just this afternoon, I must admit, I was telling somebody how difficult it is. Okay, let's not go into that. But what was Hashem telling Moshe Rabbeinu? Alei Rosh HaPisgah, go up the mountain, v'sa inecha. What's he telling him to do? There's a way to look at Eretz Yisrael. Don't look at the ground. Don't look at the dirt. Don't look at the all sorts of things we shouldn't look at. Let's not even mention them. Let's not be amongst those motziei dibara al haaretz. That in parentheses, he's telling Moshe Rabbeinu how to look at Eretz Yisrael. Lift up your eyes. That's an attitude of mind. Look for the good things in Eretz Yisrael. Don't look for the bad. So what was the Chet HaMeraglim? The Chet HaMeraglim was, they had a preset agenda. And the way our brains work, they work with cognitive consistency. We don't like cognitive dissonance. When we've made up our mind about something, we're lazy. We don't want to re-examine it. We can't be bothered. And therefore, if I've decided that I don't like a certain thing, I don't want to look at it again. If I've decided, there are many examples, but if I've decided, I'm Hasidish and I don't like the Litvish, so the Litviks are this, the Yekas are this, Haredim are this, Modern Orthodox is this, blacks are this, whites are this, gay people are this. There are so many things in our life that we make a decision at a certain point and we don't bother to re-examine it again. And the next source on our sheet, this is brought up in Halakha. The next source on our sheet, one before the end. Mishum da'avid inish lachzuke b'diburei. Man is prone lachzuke b'diburei. Man is prone to stick to his opinion. I remember a million years ago when I was in the lower sixth and I was the chairman of the Israel Society in school. We had a debate. This will give away my age, but I brought two people in to debate whether it was right to give up the Sinai or not. There probably are a few people on this call who remember that. Is it good to go? And I remember it was actually an English or a history teacher who said to me, it's not debating, might fine-tune your skills, but it's not good to stand up and defend a side that you don't believe in. Right? Why? Because once you've defended a side, I remember actually one of the first shiurim I heard from Rav Noach Weinberg was entitled "Be a Judge and Not a Lawyer." Be a judge. B'mchilas, any lawyers there are on this call. Be a judge and not a lawyer. Why? Because a judge looks at both sides, and a lawyer is paid to just defend one side. and that's not a good thing. The Dayanim and the next source as well, that a Dayan and a Beis Din is not allowed to hear one side out of court. You're not allowed to talk to a Baal Din before they come to court. Why? Because then you're going to be stuck with that opinion. So again, back to our subject matter, which is, I think this is the root of the Chet HaMeraglim, was Vayelchu Vayavo. They had a preset agenda. They had a mindset. They weren't looking for the truth. They weren't judging. They weren't going Latur et Aretz. They were going Lachpor et Aretz. That is the root of Tisha B'Av. The root of Tisha B'Av is not looking at things afresh, is coming to a decision. And again, I speak for personally, but I think we can all look into this ourselves if you're honest about it. We come to opinions about things when we're pretty young. And unless we are in a miscarriage, unless we are within a framework where we are encouraged to look at things again, we get stuck with our opinion. I am what I am. I decided what I'm going to be when I'm 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 25. How often in life do we revisit it? And the Shema, it says, Asher Anochim Mitzavecha Hayom. The Torah and Avodat Hashem should be Chadashim Beinecha. They should be new, they should be fresh. Kilu Hayom, as if today we're getting it from Sinai. We say that every single time we say the Shema, because if we don't do that, then we're going to look at everything with tinted glasses, and we're just going to look for what we want to see. The next source on the sheet, and I find this such a powerful, very, very famous Gemara, but I want to bring it in this context. The top of the next side, the Gemara in Eruvin Yud Gimel. Omer Rabbi Abba Mashur Shalosh Shanu Nechlu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued over everything under the sun for 3 years. Halolo Omer Halacha K'Meisenu. Beis Shammai is saying halachas like us, Beis Hillel is saying halachas like that. Yotza Baskala, a heavenly voice came out and said, Edu Divrei Elokim Chaim. Both of them, there's truth in both of them, which is the subject of many shirim, but not this one. V'alocha kebeis Hillel, but the halacha is like Beis Hillel. V'chim achar she'elim elu divrei Elokim Chaim. If both of them have truth in them, they are both the words of the living God. It's Teres Chaim from Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Mipnei mazal chu Beis Hillel lekva halacha. Why is the halacha like Beis Hillel? So the Gemara brings 3 reasons. We're not going to analyze all 3 of them, but we'll say them very quickly. Number 1, are you? Because Beis Hillel were pleasant. They were pleasant to deal with. They weren't difficult. And that seems to be a source of halacha. Ashrei ploni shalom Torah. Happy is a person who learned Torah. Ashrei Rabbi shelimdo Torah. Why? Because such a person is dibura benachas imabrios, because they speak nicely to people. Also a good thing to remember Erev Tisha B'Av. The next point, v'shonim divrei v'divrei Beis Shammai. What was special about Hillel, Beis Hillel, is that they didn't only learn their own opinion. Shonim divrei v'divrei Beis Shammai. They looked at the other opinion, but the Gemara says even further than that. V'lo, not only that, but furthermore, they learned the opinion of Beis Shammai before their own, when they were teaching it to their Talmidim. Why? Because they were looking for the truth. They weren't looking to back up their own opinion. And I think this is such a beautiful way of bringing out, if we take a step back, how does learning in a Beis Medrash go? How does Torah learning go? We're not looking to back up our own opinion. What happens when you sit in the Beis Medrash with your chavrusa? One of you maybe will read the Gemara. Your chavrusa will tell you, no, that's not the way to understand the Gemara. I think it's this way. Then you look at Rashi, he gives you a different approach. Then Tosfos says that Rashi doesn't know what he's talking about. Then you look at the Rashba, you look at the Rif, the Ram, the Rosh, and everybody is giving you a new way, a different way of seeing reality. That is gorgeous. The idea of that is to be a Jew is to try and train yourself not in subjectivity, not in only viewing the world the way I want to see the world, but looking for objectivity. Why? Because the ultimate objectivity is Hashem himself. He's objective. He's not backing up one side. He knows all of the sides. And our way of learning Torah is to beat ourselves up and prove to us and show us again and again and again and again that the way you saw the world might not be correct. There's another way to see things. And again, to train ourselves to see the world in that way is, I think, according to what we're saying, a tikkun, a fixing of the Chet HaMeraglim and every Tisha B'Av that we've had since. And if you just, I brought the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos over here, beautiful, beautiful Mishnah. Hu ha'yomer, aseh ritzono kirtzonecha, make your rotzen, your will, the will of Hashem. Kidei she'aseh ritzoncha kirtzono, so he makes your will his will. Bata ritzoncha b'nei ritzono, and nullify what you want in the face of what Hashem wants, and then you won't have trouble from anybody else. What's it doing? It's a way of life. A way of life. We're supposed to be living the Ratzon Hashem. So get out of yourself. Get out of yourself and the narrow way in which you see the world. Try and understand what Hashem wants. The objective truth, the emes, the aleph, mem, taf of the world. And I'll say, since I'm giving these words, Li'ilui Nishmas, my mother, Aleh Shalom, her initials were EMS, and she always wrote her name with a segol, 3 letters, the S sound under the E and under the M, which spells MS, Aleph Mem Taf, the beginning, the middle, of the end, which I must admit I didn't appreciate until very recently. But it's a beautiful idea. That MS, that truth, it permeates, penetrates all the way through. It can't just be an aleph. Sheker ein lo raglayim. Sheker is we live in a world of sheker, a world of subjectivity, a world where I'm just looking through my telescope. And by the way, since I'm sitting in Yerushalayim, hashkifa mima'oin kodshecha, we ask Hashem. Hashkifa mima'oin kodshecha. The Rashi over there says that anywhere where it says uses the word of hashkafa in the Torah, it's always for bad. Vayashkef al pnei Sodom, except for hashkifa mima'oin kodshecha. A mishkefet in Ivrit are binoculars. What's the difference between a telescope and binoculars? I can see my friend, the optician, is over there. Robert Ledham, all the way from Efrat. So I'll tell you, the difference is one eye. One eye is not objective. 2 eyes. Ayin ba'ayin yiru b'shuv Hashem tzion. Ayin ba'ayin, 2 eyes. The Yerushalayim is a place where we're trying to see with objectivity. Not just with one eye. We'll continue the Mishnah. Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't make yourself separate. My opinion, it doesn't matter what everybody else says. Al tamim ba'atzmacha ad yom mezcha. Don't trust yourself. V'al tadin es chavercha ad shetagia limkomo. Don't judge your neighbor until you are in his place. What do you know? What do you know? You're not in his place. You will never be in his place. And that's why don't judge him until you're in his place. But we have to judge things all the time. So that's why Rav Nach said, be a judge and not a lawyer. A lawyer is only backing up one side. What's this got to do with Sinas Chinam? Every Tisha B'Av comes around. Sinat Chinam. The Beit HaMikdash, the longest Golus. Not a Golus of 70 years, but of 2,000 years in which we still languish. Why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? Through Sinat Chinam. What is Sinat Chinam? You know, if you think of somebody you don't like, hopefully we can't think of anybody, there's a reason. So what's the Chinam? What's the Chinamkeit? Chinam means petty. Chinam means small. So the first thing is we are Mamleches Kani V'Goy Kodesh. We have to be big people. Mamleches Kani V'Goy Kodesh. We got the Torah. We're supposed to change the world. Of course, they're out there on social media talking their garbage. Of course, they're out there on the streets fighting each other because we haven't taught them. We haven't taught them. So we can't think small. Chinam is small. But what is sinat chinam? Okay, you don't like the guy. He cut you up in driving. He cheated you in a deal. He didn't speak nicely to you. Whatever she did, there was a reason that you didn't like that person. What's the chinam? The chinam is shatamam shichim asinazot, the perpetuation of that sinah. Okay, there was a reason, but it was an argument that your parents had in the last generation with his parents, her parents, right? It was a machlokas in the family. So you're still not talking to them, or it was the last season. It was when we were in school. It was the last. I don't know. The perpetuation of it is the chinam. Let it go. Let it go. Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael. Before we proclaim Shema Yisrael, we've got to listen. Got to listen to other people. When you listen to other people, you've got to be quiet. It's a problem in Rehov Balfour, 10 minutes away from where I'm sitting now, because nobody's listening to the other person. They're listening to their own voice. We like listening to our own voice, but they're not listening to other people. Stop and listen. Be quiet. And I think that if you think about hatred and prejudice all over the world, it all goes back to Vayelchu Vayavo. We formed our opinions a long time ago, and we don't revisit them. That's not the way we're supposed to behave. That's not the way we learn Torah. We've seen these psukim before. Hopefully we look at them a little bit afresh. Every single time we do Chazorah, we're looking afresh. Every single time we sit down with a chavrusa, hopefully there's something that is bringing me to look at it fresh, look at it anew. And again, I'm going to maybe make this personal, and I'm going to make it personal because I feel that I have an obligation to do so, because I learned some enormous lessons over the last 2.5 years with my mother, but I think they're really, really pertinent to the subject that we've been talking about. And we're only halfway through the Shloshim for Chava Miriam Bashmul Yehuda. There's an expression in Ivrit, Kol od sha'aner dolek eshal letaken. You are a kehillah of ner. Kol od sha'aner dolek. As long as the ner is burning, eshal letaken, one can fix things. I think that my mother's favorite chapter of Tehillim was Esayinai le'arim me'ayin yavo ezri. And I'm repeating it because this is relevant to what we're talking about over here. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Me'ayin yavo ezri. From where will my help come? Ezri me'im Hashem. Oseh shamayim ba'aretz. So we say to him, and we look to Hashem. We have bitochen in Hashem. But the Medrash, Parshas Vayetze, says, Esai la'ay le'arim. Don't read it, lift up my eyes to the harim, ela lehorim, to our parents, to the people who came before us, to our teachers, to our parents. Me'ayin yavo ezri. B'zchut my mother, I had the privilege to understand for the first time in my life that what the Pasuk is saying is as follows. Let's take a little detour first. What happens with children and parents? And it doesn't matter if we're 80 years old, 70, 60, 50, 15. We all had parents. And the way Hashem made the world is that you get to a certain age of adolescence and you exert your independence. You become a person in your own right. And in becoming a person in your own right and searching for your own identity and your own sense of self, we separate from our parents. And sometimes that self actually becomes ego. And for the rest of our life, very often, we're fighting. It's not only parents, it's teachers, it's rabbis, it's, I don't know, people older than us, and, people, I know better, and I stop listening. And whenever that thing happens, it niggles me, or it annoys me, and I go like this. And I'm not listening. And I decided to be, to vote left wing in Israel. And I want to give up the shtachim. I decided to be an Eretz Yisrael Hashlima person. I decided to be a chosid. I decided to be an ardent Zionist. I whatever. And I'm not listening anymore. So I don't need to talk about it over here, but I had an interaction with my mother over 2 years ago, and the penny dropped. I understood I've only got one mother, and my wife told me that's 50% of my genes. There's only one mother, and 50% of your genes are from her, and she's terminally ill. So drop it. Drop the differences. When do we understand the help that we get from others? Me'ayin. Me'ayin. Ayin is nothing. Ayin is the opposite of the ego. We all need a healthy sense of self. But a healthy sense of self is what the most humble of men, Moshe Rabbeinu, had. He was anav mikol adam. But in Devarim, he knows how to give techacha to Klal Yisrael. And when his leadership is challenged, he knows how to open the earth, and they're swallowed up. He had a healthy sense of self. He didn't have an ego. When we have egos, we cannot listen to other. If I allow myself to be ayin, if I allow the ego to drop, yavo ezri, then we can have chibur. Then we can have Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim habnuyah, ki'ir shechu b'layachtav. Yerushalayim rebuilt. It says in the Shir Amalis, will be a city shechubra layachtav. The Yerushalmi says, the Gemara Yerushalmi Chagiga says, what does that mean? Ir shel sakol Yisrael chaverim. It's a city that makes all of the Jewish people chaverim, friends. What is a friend? A friend is somebody you have a chibur with. A chibur, a connection, like a vav hachibur that connects. But you can't be connected with somebody when your egos are bashing together. So take a step back. Take a step back. Whatever the Chet HaMaraglim was and why they did it, they had a certain perspective that was formed at a certain age. And they weren't able to look at things anew, to look at things afresh. If we look at all the problems we have around us, so many of them would be solved if we looked at things afresh. There isn't much time left. There isn't much time left. Kol od she'aner dolek efshar letaken. As long as the ner of Yisrael is burning, as long as we are in this world that is concealed, that is hidden, and yet if you just scratch the surface, you can find the neshama, you can find the leiv, and you can find the love. But one has to do it by letting go of our preset notions of what the people around us are, how clever they are, how deep they are, how wealthy they are or not, and just look afresh at our fellow Jew, look them in the eye, ayin ba'ayin yeru, b'shuv Hashem Tzion. Aaron, you asked me to leave some minutes, so I think there are 4 minutes left. I'm happy to stay afterwards, but if there are any questions, apparently on these Zoom things, you can unmute yourself. I know you can. How do you do that? You press on your thing and a little blue thing will come up on the right with 3 dots and it will say unmute. So Robert Lederman, our optician from Efrat, you gave us a thumbs up. Does that mean you want to say something? I don't know. No. Okay, if anybody wants to say something, ask something, you can throw as many tomatoes as you like because they won't reach the target. Any questions? You can also write them in the chat. Chat, look, that's that clever thing over there. Oh, it's a very boring chat. Okay, just a Google Drive.
Anyone have any questions they want to ask?
If not, I will end up with a little anecdote from my mother about Yerushalayim. It's a beautiful one. I mentioned it in the Levaya, and people are a little bit shocked. But anyway, any questions? Mr. and Mrs. Lederman, don't be shy. The Italian job, Italian colony. Mr. and Mrs. Vecht. Oh, so nice to see all these lovely people. So I'll just share with you something really beautiful. I think very beautiful. But Baruch Hashem, our daughter gave birth on Lag BaOmer to a baby boy in Hadassah Har HaTzofim, in Hadassah Hospital, Mount Scopus. And that was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And at 7:30, my mother, Alea Shalom, was going into a procedure in the other Hadassah in Enkarim. And I called her up in the morning. I said, Mummy, you just became a great-grandmother. Again, in Yerushalayim, a baby boy was born. And without thinking, blinking, I don't know, my mother said, Yivarechecha Hashem b'Tzion. May Hashem bless you from Tzion. Urei b'tuv Yerushalayim. May you see the good of Yerushalayim. Urei banim levanecha shalom al Yisrael. May you see grandchildren, shalom al Yisrael. And the last thing that we sang to last Tuesday afternoon were those words ending up with shalom al Yisrael. And last night I gave a sort of a virtual tour in the old city to a group from South Africa. And I took them to my favorite place in the Rova Yehudi, which is about, I don't know, 70, 80 seconds from where I'm sitting now. It's a pasuk written on the wall of Kikar Batei Machaseh, the Rothschild Square, which is basically a playground in the old city today. The pasuk that's written on the wall, you might know from a Mordechai ben David song, but it's from Zechariah Hanavi, and it reminds us of the story of Rabbi Akiva, who was walking on Har HaTzofim on Mount Scopus. It's a story that's told every Tisha B'Av. The story of Rabbi Akiva is walking with the other Rabbanim, and they see a fox running over Har HaBayit, and the other rabbis rip their clothes, and they start crying, and they look at Rabbi Akiva, and he's masachek, he's smiling, and Rabbi Akiva, why are you sad? Why are you smiling? And they, well, we're sad because this is a place where it says V'hazara karev yumat. A stranger who went on the Temple Mount is punished by death. What is there to smile about when you see a Yerushalayim in ruins? So Rabbi Akiva turned to them and he said, we never believed this could happen. We never believed Sion kesadeh techaresh, that Zion could be plowed like a field. How could that happen? How could the golden age ever come to an end? Yeah, those words resonate with us, don't they? 80 years ago and hundreds of years ago. How could the golden age ever end? How could it end in Spain? How could it end in Germany? God forbid, how could it end anywhere else? We never believed that God would allow his house to be destroyed. However, we forgot. It's called the Bet HaMikdash. It's a house. A house is a place of relationship. If there is no relationship, then Hashem would rather destroy the house than destroy the people. But now that I've seen that terrible thing can happen, so I believe something else can happen. And that's the Nevuah of Zechariah that's written on the wall 60, 70 seconds away from where I'm sitting now. The day will come when old men and women will sit in the streets of Yerushalayim. They'll grow to a ripe old age with a walking stick in hand. Not like those pictures that you and I would grow up on of old Jews being forced to clean the streets of the Warsaw ghetto. No, Yerushalayim, old men and women will sit in the streets of Yerushalayim. and the open places, the streets of the city, Yimle'u Yiladim v'Yiladot Mesachakim b'Rechovotzea, will be filled with little boys and girls playing in the streets of Yerushalayim. Those Rabbanim turned to Rabbi Akiva and they said, Nichamtanu, you have comforted us. Akiva Nichamtanu. The name of our grandson, of my mother's great-grandson who was born on Lag BaOmer, is Akiva. Nichamtanu, Akiva, Nichamtanu. And to you, all my friends, wherever you are, whether you're near to Brent Street, or Rehov HaDekel, or I forgot the names of the roads, wherever you are, I so believe we can be that generation of Nichamtanu. Shabbat Nachamu is a few days away, and Tisha B'Av can be the Moed it's supposed to be. Maybe one of the things that we need to do is let go of our egos, let go of our preset agenda of the way we think the world needs to be, or what we think about that guy, all the people close to us. Let it go. Kol od she'aner dolek, as long as it is burning, if shalataken, we can fix the relationships, we can fix our lives, and we can fix the whole world. And that is our duty to do. I'd like to finish by saying, Mitzvah Hashem, it should be a good Yom Tov. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Schiff, for the Rav Shir this evening. I'm sure everyone will join me in wishing the Rav a Chaim Aruchim, and we hope in Mitzvah Hashem that for the Rav and all of us, these coming days will be transformed from days of mourning to, in the words of the Navi Zechariah, Sasin, Simcha, Nad, and Tovim, days of rejoicing, happiness. And please God, we will all be in with the Rav and Yerushalayim for Simchas and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash in the very near future.
Amen. 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 Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Shkaya.